text my attorney sent me at 11,047 on a Tuesday night had 4 words: "Do not call anyone. Not my husband, not my sister, not my mother-in-law who had been blowing up my phone since 6 that evening with messages that started warm and turned strange by the 8th one. I stared at my attorney's text until the screen went dark, then I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there in the quiet of my own house, listening to the refrigerator hum. My name is Tatum. I'm 31 years old. 8 months ago, I sold the catering company I built over 6 years for $2.3 million. I started it in my apartment kitchen with a $1,200 stand mixer and a folding table. I ended it signing papers in a glass-walled conference room while my attorney, a woman named Claudette Hess, sat next to me and didn't smile until after the other party's lawyers left the room. I thought selling would feel like exhaling, like finally putting down something too heavy to carry. Instead, it felt like stepping off a ledge and not knowing yet if there was ground beneath me. Claudette had warned me. "The money changes things," she said the day we closed, "not just for you, for everyone around you." I nodded like I understood. I didn't. Not yet. My husband, I'll call him by what he was to me then, my husband had been supportive through all of it. The years of 4 a.m. wake-ups, the weekends I missed, the holidays I spent in commercial kitchens instead of at tables with family. He said he was proud of me. He said it so many times I stopped really hearing it, the way you stop hearing a clock tick after you've lived with it long enough. His mother was another matter. She had never approved of the business, not because she thought I couldn't do it, but because she thought I shouldn't have to. In her world, women build homes, not companies. She said it nicely, always, the way a person can say something unkind and leave you holding it without understanding why it stings. "You work so hard, honey. Don't you want to rest?" She'd ask that at Thanksgiving, at Easter, at every Sunday dinner where I showed up tired and she showed up with a casserole and an opinion. After the sale, something shifted in her. I felt it before I could name it. She started calling more, stopping by with food I hadn't asked for, asking questions that were just slightly too specific. "So how does that work? The money just sits in an account," and then laughing it off before I could answer. My sister-in-law was worse. She and I had always been polite to each other in the careful way of women who have nothing in common except the man they both love. After the sale, the politeness developed a different texture. She started texting me articles about financial advisors. She came to my house one Saturday with a folder, an actual printed folder with a binder clip full of information about a family investment opportunity. Her husband, my husband's younger brother, had apparently been looking into it for months. They just needed a partner with liquidity. I told them I'd think about it. I was stalling. Something felt wrong, the way a smell can be wrong before you figure out what it is. I brought it to Claudette. She listened without interrupting, which is what I like about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to do something for me, and I need you to trust me before I explain why." She told me to call my husband that evening and tell him the deal had fallen through. Not the real story. Not the money is in a structured settlement and I'm working with a financial advisor and it's going to be fine. She wanted me to tell him that there had been a complication, a tax liability they hadn't caught before closing, that a significant portion of the sale price was now tied up in a legal dispute and might not be recoverable, that instead of $2.3 million, I was looking at something closer to $200,000 after obligations cleared. I stared at her. "You want me to lie to my husband." She looked back at me steadily. "I want you to give the people around you the opportunity to show you who they are." I drove home feeling like I was wearing someone else's skin. My husband was in the living room watching something on TV, feed up content the way he always was in the evenings. I sat down next to him. I told him the story Claudette had scripted. He didn't say anything for almost 20 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "Okay, but does this affect the loan? Not are you okay? Not what happened? Not what do you need right now? The loan. We have been talking about refinancing the house, taking out equity. He had floated the idea 3 times in the past month, each time with slightly more specific numbers than the last. "I don't know yet," I said. My voice came out steady. "I don't know how." "Because I already talked to someone at the bank," he said, "and they said with the sale proceeds as collateral." "I know what you said." I stood up. "I'm going to bed." I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, and felt something cold moving through my chest. that I couldn't name yet. By morning, he had texted his mother. I know because she called me at 7:42 a.m., and I know because the timestamp is still in my phone, and I know because of what she said when I answered. She didn't ask how I was. She said, "Tatum, I think we need to sit down as a family. There are some things that need to be discussed sooner rather than later." Her voice was different. The warmth was still there. She was too practiced to drop it entirely, but underneath it was something businesslike, something that had been waiting for an opening. "Sure," I said. "When were you thinking?" "Today," she said. "This afternoon. I texted Claudette immediately. She responded within 4 minutes go. Don't sign anything. I'll be there by 3. My mother-in-law's house is 40 minutes from mine, in a suburb where all the lawns are manicured and all the cars are recent models, and everything looks like a set built to suggest prosperity. I had always felt slightly wrong there, like a piece of furniture from a different room. When I arrived, my sister-in-law's car was already in the driveway, so was my brother-in-law's truck. My husband was already inside. He had left before me that morning, said he had an errand, didn't specify. The living room had the feeling of a meeting that had started without me. Everyone was seated except my mother-in-law, who was standing near the fireplace in the way she does when she wants to control a room. My husband sat on the couch with his hands between his knees, not looking at me when I came in. My sister-in-law had a legal pad on her knee with actual handwritten notes on it. My brother-in-law was doing something on his phone and put it down when I walked in, which felt deliberate. "Tatum." My mother-in-law gestured to an armchair that had been positioned slightly apart from the rest of the furniture. I noticed that. I sat down anyway. "We're glad you came," she said. I waited. "We've been talking," she said, "and we think, as a family, that given the situation, some decisions need to be made together." "What situation?" I asked. My sister-in-law looked at her notepad. "The financial restructuring. That's what she called it. Restructuring. Like it was a corporate event. We understand there's been a significant loss, and we want to help manage this as a unit." I looked at my husband. He still wasn't looking at me. "There's a property," my mother-in-law said, and she said it so casually, like it had just occurred to her. "My mother's property, and her estate. We've been waiting to finalize how it's distributed. Given everything that's happened, it makes sense to revisit the arrangement. My husband's grandmother had passed away 9 months ago. I had gone to the funeral. I had held his hand in the pew and brought food to the reception after. I knew she'd had property, a small house outside of Raleigh and some acreage attached to it. But the estate had been moving slowly through probate, and it had never seemed like something I was supposed to weigh in on. It wasn't my family's money. I had never asked about it. "What arrangement?" I said. My mother-in-law smiled the smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "We're proposing that the property be held in a family trust managed jointly. Given your current situation, we'd need you to sign off on a restructuring of your spousal interest. Just a formality." My brother-in-law pulled a folder from the coffee table and held it out toward me, a different folder than the investment one. Thicker, with a tab that said "Sposal Wiver" in bold at the top. I took it. I opened it. I am not an attorney, but I have signed enough contracts to know what words like relinquish and irrevocable mean when they appear in the same sentence. They were asking me to sign away my legal interest in assets that, as a spouse, I may have had partial claim to under North Carolina law, in exchange for being described in the document as a participating family member in good standing. Whatever that meant. My sister-in-law leaned forward. "We know this is a lot right now, but honestly, Tatum, it's better for everyone if we get this settled before things get messier. You've got enough going on." "Enough going on," said with sympathy, said like a favor. My brother-in-law finally spoke. "The property value alone is close to 400,000. This isn't nothing. We're trying to protect it, for all of us." I looked at my husband, the man I had been with for 6 years, who had watched me build something from nothing, who had eaten my test recipes at midnight, who had taken the day off work when I signed my first commercial contract to take me out to dinner. He was looking at the carpet. I set the folder on my knee. I didn't sign it. I said, "Can I use the bathroom?" My mother-in-law said of course. I walked down the hall, closed the door, and texted Claudette 2 words, "They have documents." Her response came in under a minute stall. "I'm 12 minutes out." 12 minutes. I ran the water so it sounded like I was washing my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink, the one with the little seashell soaps arranged next to it that she never lets anyone use. I didn't look scared. I looked like someone who had stopped being surprised, and that was almost worse. I went back to the living room. I sat back down in the separated chair. I said, I want to read it more carefully before I sign anything. My mother-in-law's expression didn't change, but her voice went cooler by exactly 1 degree. Of course. That's reasonable. She said it like it wasn't. My sister-in-law started talking about the estate timeline, the probate, the complications. My brother-in-law said something about tax exposure. My husband said nothing. I watched the clock on the wall above the television and kept my hands folded in my lap and nodded occasionally and said, mm-hmm, the way you do when you are waiting. The doorbell rang at 3:04 p.m. My mother-in-law frowned slightly. I'm not expecting anyone. I am, I said. The room went quiet in a way that felt like a held breath. My mother-in-law went to the door. I heard it open. I heard Claudette's voice, professional and unhurried, saying, Hello, I'm Claudette Hess. I'm Miss Wren's attorney. She invited me. The silence that followed was 8 seconds long. I counted those too. Claudette came into the living room with her briefcase and the particular kind of stillness she carries, the kind that makes rooms feel smaller. She looked at the folder in my lap. She looked at my husband. She looked at my mother-in-law, who had followed her in from the door and was standing very straight. I see you've already started, Claudette said. She sat down in the chair nearest me and set her briefcase on the coffee table, directly on top of the papers my brother-in-law had brought. My mother-in-law said, This is a family matter. Claudette said, Then it's fortunate that Tatum is family, and that she's asked me to be here on her behalf. My sister-in-law looked at her notepad like it might offer guidance. My brother-in-law looked at her notepad like it might offer guidance. My brother-in-law looked at his phone. My husband looked at the carpet. Claudette opened her briefcase. What she pulled out was not what I expected. I thought she'd have counter documents, cease and desist language, something I could understand in the way I understand business contracts. What she pulled out were printed emails, dated, with names and addresses in the headers. She placed them on the coffee table. 6 weeks ago, she said, a paralegal at the estate attorney's office received an email from an address registered to this household. She didn't look at anyone specific. She didn't need to. The email requested an informal conversation about modifying the beneficiary designation on the Raleigh property before probate closed. The request cited, and I'm quoting, a change in family financial circumstances that made the original designation no longer appropriate. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking. My mother-in-law said, that was a preliminary inquiry. Nothing official. No, Claudette agreed. It wasn't. But it was made without Tatum's knowledge, about an estate in which her husband is a named beneficiary and she holds spousal interest. And it was made 3 weeks before you asked her to come here today and sign a waiver. My brother-in-law started to say something. Claudette held up one finger, just slightly, and he stopped. Tatum didn't lose her sale proceeds, Claudette said. She said it to the room, not to me. There is no tax liability. There is no legal dispute. The money is exactly where it should be, and it always was. What you were shown was a test. She paused. You failed it. My husband's head came up for the first time since I'd walked in. He was looking at me now. His face had a specific expression I had never seen on it before. Not anger. Something between disbelief and the beginning of shame. His mother said, Tatum, this is manipulative. You deceived your own family. I looked at her. I had been thinking about what I would say if I got to this moment, turning words over in my head during those 12 minutes in the bathroom, during the drive over. I had prepared something measured and firm. Instead, what came out was quieter than I expected. You had a folder with my name on it, I said. You had it ready before I walked in the door. You seated me apart from everyone else. You had my husband call you before he talked to me. I stopped. I didn't deceive anyone. I gave you the chance to choose differently, and you didn't take it. My sister-in-law's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Claudette slid a different set of documents across the coffee table. These, she said, are formal notices of your roles in the estate proceeding. Given the documented attempt to modify beneficiary designations without the knowledge or consent of all interested parties, the estate attorney has been notified and the probate has been flagged for review. The property will not be transferred to a family trust. It will be distributed according to the original designation. She folded her hands, which includes Tatum's spousal interest. My mother-in-law sat down slowly in the chair across from me, like something had gone out of her legs. My brother-in-law put his phone on the cushion beside him and didn't pick it up again. My sister-in-law's notepad slid off her knee and she didn't reach for it. My husband said my name, just my name, the way you say it when you don't have anything attached to it yet. I looked at him for a long moment. 6 years. The midnight recipe tests. The day he took off work. The carpet he'd been staring at for the past hour. You didn't ask if I was okay, I said. When I told you. You asked about the loan. He opened his mouth. Don't, I said, not loud, not angry. Just done. My mother-in-law tried one last time. She has a way of making her voice go soft when she's losing ground, of finding the register that sounds like maternal concern. Tatum, sweetheart, we made a mistake. We panicked. We were trying to protect what the family built. I know what you were trying to protect. I said, it wasn't me. She flinched. I noticed, and then I stopped noticing, because I was already standing up. Claudette stood too, replaced her documents and her briefcase with the same economy of motion she does everything. And when she clicked the latches closed it sounded, in that silent room, like something final. At the door she paused and turned back. One more thing, she said. I hadn't known she was going to say anything else. I don't think they had either. She reached into the side pocket of her briefcase and produced a small envelope, letter-sized, with my name handwritten on the front, in handwriting I didn't recognize. This was given to me by the estate attorney, she said. It was in the grandmother's files. She left instructions that it be delivered to you privately after probate cleared. My mother-in-law stood up very fast. That's what is that? Claudette handed it to me. My husband's grandmother had met me 4 times. At the engagement dinner, at the wedding, at Christmas 2 years ago, and at my business's 5th anniversary party, which she had attended with a card she'd picked out herself that said, "For the hard workers" on the front. She was 83 years old, and she had grown up in a town with 1 stoplight and put herself through nursing school by working nights at a textile mill. And she was the only member of that family who had ever asked me, genuinely, what the hardest part of running a business was, and then actually listened to the answer. I broke the seal standing in my mother-in-law's doorway. Inside was a handwritten note, 3 lines long and the second envelope beneath it. The note said, Tatum, I see how hard you work for this family. I always hoped they would see it too. I'm sorry if they didn't. This is yours. The second envelope held a deed, not the Raleigh property, a separate parcel, a piece of land in the mountains of western North Carolina, 22 acres that the grandmother had purchased in 1987 and never told anyone about. It had been appraised, according to a document attached to the deed, at slightly over $800,000. She had put it in my name, only mine, not my husband's, not held jointly, mine. The appraiser's report was dated 4 months before she died. She had known, I don't know how, the way some people know things they shouldn't, from watching carefully and quietly for years, the way she had watched her son's wife manage that family and watched her son's son manage his marriage. She had known and she had planned, and she had given me the one thing none of them could contest, argue over, or take back. My mother-in-law was still standing inside the door. She had seen the deed. I could tell by the way her face had gone very still. She never mentioned that property, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. No, I said, she didn't. I stepped outside. The afternoon was bright and warm, the kind of late spring afternoon that doesn't care what's happened indoors, the sun going on in its own direction regardless. Claudette walked with me to my car. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, You okay? I will be, I said. She nodded like that was exactly the right answer. I drove home alone. I didn't call anyone. I didn't need to. I sat at the kitchen counter where I'd stood 11 days before reading her text. Do not call anyone. And I held the grandmother's letter in both hands and read it again. I'm sorry if they didn't. 3 words that held 31 years of things I'd never said to anyone. I set it down. I looked out the window at the backyard, the garden I'd planted 2 springs ago, because I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't work, that was just growing. The refrigerator hummed. My phone stayed face down. I had built something from nothing once already. I knew how to do that. I knew the 4 a.m. part, the folding table part, the signing papers in a glass-walled conference room part. I knew what it felt like to carry something alone for years and then set it down. I wasn't afraid of starting over. I was only afraid I'd waited too long to start. I picked up my phone, turned it over, and called my own attorney back. "I'm ready," I said. "Tell me what comes next."